The world we inhabit in Fallout is one centuries into the future, but interestingly, even before the fires of atomic warfare changed it, it was not the world that we know ourselves. The Fallout universe is technically set in a divergent universe from our own, one that led to a plethora of weird and wonderful things that are found in the game's settings. Our two universes ran relatively parallel to one another up until the 6th of August 1945, when the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. After this terrible day, the two universes split from one another, with theirs spiralling towards a future where a world war was practically imminent, and ours, where a world war is probably going to happen, but maybe not, we'll see. From this date onwards, the Fallout universe came into being, and delved into its 1950s-esque futuristic setting that we identify it with. However, there were still many people, events, and things from our universe which still managed to occur at the same time in their universe, so let's take a look at them today. One of the most iconic parts of Fallout that fans identify with is its music. For most of us being from generations of 1980s onwards, it was probably our first proper exposure and introduction to music and artists from the 1940s and 1950s. I don't think I would ever know the lyrics to Maybe by the Ink Spots if I'd never played Fallout 3. Due to the Divergent universe occurring in 1945, many of these bands seen within game did exist prior to the Divergent universe. However, there are also many artists and songs that came into being in our world's 60s, 70s, and even 80s that apparently had an identical appearance within the Fallout universe. Most notably, Elvis Presley evidently was given the same title in the Fallout universe as he was in our own, namely as the King of Rock and Roll. Elvis's breakout was in 1956, which does set the theme with most of the other artists that encapsulate the Fallout series. However, his music was notably absent from all the entries to the series. New Vegas developer Jason Bergman had explained that despite the desire to have his songs appear within their game, the licensing costs to include it were astronomical. It was far more economical to save the budget for a range of other songs that were able to be included, since Johnny Guitar was probably dirt cheap. Nevertheless, although they don't appear in-game, Elvis and his music is referenced, and not only the hits from the 50s when he first broke out. Songs from the 60s and even the 70s when he was in his comeback era, such as Viva Las Vegas and In the Ghetto, also have references, indicating that the King of Rock and Roll's career trajectory must have followed the similar path. Although one can only hope that this version of Elvis never made Blue Hawaii. Ultimately, Elvis's reach must have been the same as it was in our universe. An entire faction within New Vegas are known as the Kings, and they're based in a pre-war Elvis school of impersonation. The Kings misinterpreted the school as a house of worship, but also do cunningly explain that it could be considered as such, considering it was a place where people would come to walk, talk, and act like the king. In Fallout 76, another post-Divergent song can be heard playing on the radio, as well as in the game's trailer, and that song is Take Me Home Country Roads. Having been written in 1971, Take Me Home Country Roads would have to be one of the more contemporary songs from our universe to have appeared in the Fallout universe. However, an important point to make is that the version seen in-game, and therefore in their universe, was not performed by John Denver, but instead was a cover by a group called Spank. Nonetheless, the song appeared to mirror its real-world success. A few months after its release, Take Me Home Country Roads reached number 2 on the Billboard's charts in our world, while in Fallout 76, the DJ states that pre-war terminals indicated it was one of the most popular songs in the region in the pre-war era. And it was popular enough even to motivate Sam Newen, a post-war settler, to move to Appalachia, given his love for the song. In Fallout 2, a resident of New Reno can be seen who is evidently keeping the spirit of Elton John alive. Renesco, known as the Rocket Man, is a post-war chemist who operates a pharmacy in New Reno, offering illicit and medical chems. Notably, he's described as wearing a pair of huge, garish glasses, reminiscent of the man himself. Renesco explains in dialogue that, due to the fact that he sells recreational drugs, he was dubbed the Rocket Man. Rocket Man, huh? You know the line in that Elton John song, Rocket Man, burning off the there at home. What's he really saying there? For anyone like Renesco who's wondering what the line actually is, it's Rocket Man burning out his fuel up there alone. Anyway, Elton John evidently was just as popular in the Divergent universe as in our own, since Rocket Man was released in 1972, and is still referenced centuries into its future. One can only imagine that if Elton John did survive the Great War, he probably would still be performing his farewell tour though. Two other notable entries that we unfortunately don't have that much information on are The Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash, released in 1962, and Wouldn't It Be Nice by the Beach Boys, released in 1966. The next point is politics. Now, politics within the pre-war universe of the United States was relatively unknown. For example, while we know the name of the last leader of the People's Republic of China, the last United States president remains nameless. In the immediate lead up to the Great War, the United States was effectively an oligarchy, with a legitimate deep state known as the Enclave that had infiltrated every level of the government. However, we do know that the Republican Party still existed in some form or another post-Divergence, as characters within Fallout 2 and Fallout 3 will speak of them. And while they're not stated to outright exist, the Democrat Party, or another liberalist-based political party, remained in existence, since Jack Smith of Andale will state that he voted for a Republican governor and not one of those beatnik liberal commies. Only two real-world post-Divergence politicians are mentioned as well, both from the Republican Party. One is Richard Nixon, who's referred to on two occasions, once by a resident of New Reno who states that, "By Richard Milhouse Nixon and his mother, I don't know what practices you tribespeople follow in your dens of iniquity, but in New Reno, things are changing. We are a civilized people." The other is an incorrect answer in the athlete exam at the Pioneer Scout Camp, which asked which US president had a reputation as a wrestler, with Richard Nixon listed as one of the answers. The statement itself seems to indicate that Nixon was a United States president, even in the Divergent universe, although it's unknown if he served from 1969 to 1974 or at a different time period. He potentially was not forced to resign in scandalous circumstances, however, as pre-war dolls of the man are able to be found, known as Mr. Nixon dolls. Given the time period, these dolls would have to be made in the mid-2000s, given that they are still intact in the year of 1941, nearly 300 years after Nixon was likely president. Ronald Reagan was also evidently a president of the United States in the Divergent universe post-1945. Reagan is mentioned in a pre-war transcript in the lead-up to the Great War, where the then United States president walked out of international oil talks. The transcript goes on to state that this was for the good of the US, as the United States economy is seeing its greatest growth since the Reagan era. We don't have too much information on the post-1945 wars that were fought around the world in this Divergent universe. Korea is never mentioned, so it's unknown if the country was ever divided into North and South, leading to the Korean War. The Soviet Union and the United States were also on weirdly good terms, so most of the proxy wars and the Cold War itself never seem to have happened. Fallout was also written pre-2001, so no references are made to the Iraq or Afghan War. However, we do know that Vietnam was still invaded, although it does depend on what one considers canon or not. The introduction to Fallout Tactics features the United States declaration of war on Vietnam. However, Fallout Tactics is a bit of a weird game. Some of it is considered canon, but most of it's not. However, if the Vietnam War did occur in the post-Divergent universe, it might have led to the particular counterculture movement that was very popular in our era, and apparently also in theirs. In the Fallout universe post-Divergence, pre-war society seemed to be stuck within the 1950s era. The fashion, the manner of speaking, and even their values were all apparently the same from 1950 to 2077, with no adjustment to their culture at all. Even the counterculture movements aiming to disrupt the status quo were taken straight out of the 1950s and prior. For example, the mafia and gangsters were taken straight out of a Gangs of New York movie. They wore fedoras, suits, and I imagine they would have walked around saying, "Hey, I'm walking here," or "Wise guy," or "Yeah," quite a lot. Other than that, greasers were the only other cultural phenomenon for the youth to rebel against the men, but again, this was an archetype rooted in the past. However, of all the terrible subcultures of our real world, one managed to push through even in the Divergent universe post-1945. It wasn't the goths, it wasn't the hipsters, the emos, the punks, or even the essays. It was the hippies. Although the word hippie did exist in the 1940s, it only emerged as a proper subculture that we know it of in the 1960s. And evidently, it emerged in the Divergent universe as well. Graffiti is able to be found within New Vegas with slogans of peace and nuclear disarmament the main themes. Residents of the Capital Wasteland even refer to the then newly formed Children of Adam as akin to hippies and warn people not to fall for their hippie crap. The biggest reference to their movement is found in the pre-war ruins of the Divide. Given that the location hosts an ungodly amount of atomic warheads, hippies camp themselves at their bases, protesting for complete nuclear disarmament. Terminal records from the base commander state, "Do not engage the protesters outside the construction zone." I know, The presence of those freedom-loving, no-good nicks fills my brain with the white-hot rage of capitalist justice, but the political office has something planned for them, and you mooks better not screw it up. He and his team are paying us a visit to collect our guests and take them someplace where they can do some good for their country beyond stinking of patchouli and shooting the LSD. The hippies' leader was a woman by the name of Sunflower Summers, who after months of protesting, declared in a holotape that she had secured an agreement with the base commander, who stated he had something planned for them. Sunflower thought that the military was giving in to her demands. Instead, Sunflower Summers and the hundreds of hippies protesting in the region were arrested and transported to the Big MT research facility to serve as live human test subjects for the twisted experiments conducted in the region. It is interesting that the hippie movement survived even into late stages of the pre-war world, given that in the year of 2023, it's basically died out in ours. And it's especially curious as it was able to survive in the pre-war environment of America, where ideals like peace on earth, pacifism, and nuclear disarmament were heretical to the goals and values of the United States of America. And that is all the references to things from our universe that occurred in the post-Divergent universe of Fallout. If there's any others, please let me know in the comments, as I legitimately couldn't find any others. If you enjoyed the video, you know what to do, and I'll see you for the next one.